Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the most horrifying experience you've ever had? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was in my early 20s, my mentally ill brother, 20-ish, disappeared with a family friend. The family friend was a middle-aged dude going through a divorce who had been very supportive of my brother. Initially, we all assumed they had gone out for an unplanned camping trip. Days went by, and with no word, everyone was getting worried. My parents ended up tracking down my brother, who was camping on the streets of Portland several hours away. They picked him up and brought him back home. I remember sitting in the kitchen with my parents and my brother, trying to get information out of him about what had happened and where the family friend was. There were no clear answers, and what we were hearing was worrisome. My parents stepped out to call the police, leaving my brother and me alone in the kitchen. I took the opportunity as an older brother to try and get him to open up to me. I remember very little of the specifics of what was said except for one sentence that is forever burned into my memory. I smashed him. There were years of drama after that, including multiple escapes from penal or mental health institutions by my brother. But 20-ish years later, my brother is a ward of the state for life, and the body has never been found. That confession haunts me to this day. 8 months ago, my dad was sitting at my dining room table. He was out of breath and said he feels weird. He insisted on waiting to see what was wrong, but after a few minutes of it not passing, he said he wanted to go to an urgent care type facility. We ran out the door and into my car, and about halfway to the doctor, he says, "Whoa, I just got super lightheaded." I asked him how his hands and feet were feeling, and he said they were tingly and sore. I shifted into high gear and did 110 in a 40 zone, passed the urgent care, and went straight to the emergency room. They wheel him in immediately, slap on some stickies, and he's in VTAC with a heart rate of 188. The nurse escorted me out while another nurse wheeled the crash cart into his room. The last thing I see is my dad, pale as death, lying back on a stretcher as they prepare to defib him. The nurse tells me we're going to take a walk. I think we're going to wait in the waiting room. Instead, he takes me to a place called the Family Consultation Room, a small room with big plush chairs and calming paintings of fields and countrysides. Now I'm effing terrified. Turns out, as you might have guessed, he was having a massive heart attack. He has since had CABG, open heart surgery, and is doing much better. But I've never been more scared. The strangest part is I was calm and collected the whole time until the nurse brought me back into his room once he was stable and waiting to wake up. That's when I broke down. Watching my 9-year-old daughter die last year. She was physically disabled and her lungs were affected. She had had pneumonia not long before and had been in the hospital for 2 weeks for it. She had been released from the hospital the week before, and then she stopped breathing. 15 minutes without a pulse, too much brain damage. We ended life support 4 days later, and I stayed by her side until she passed. Oof. Scenes from the day she stopped breathing, and her passing still flash into my brain at the worst times. She was supposed to turn 10 in 2 days, and instead she's gone. It's not fair. I was in the army and deployed to Afghanistan. It was like my second day there, and I hadn't been sent to the COP. I was sent a couple days later. They had us in the big, 200-person tents that went across dirt roads from the porta-johns and the smoking area. All I had to do was take a piss real quick, and I walked out of the tent, walked over to the john, opened the door, and blam! One of the guys in my unit had his M4 in his mouth, and I don't know if I scared him by whipping the door open, but he pulled the trigger and blew half his face out. I got hit in the face with blood and bone, and I went blind for a few seconds because of the blood in my eyes. Had to sit for hours and get interviews with all the people you don't want to meet in your unit. CID, battalion commander, and division commander. The commander of BAF. Half the people thought I had something to do with it, or knew something about it. A couple of days go by and the story of what happened came out through the investigation. The weekend before we deployed, he got drunk and proposed to a stripper at her work. Apparently she said yes. Then a week later he calls the girl, and it was a dude was being a creep, so she just agreed with him to get him to go away, and she didn't know him or want anything to do with him. So he took his rifle, found a bullet, and went to the john and shot himself. The hardest part is, He didn't hit his brain. All he did was blow the front of his face off. The pressure from the shot made him blind and deaf, and the bone fragment that hit his spine has him paralyzed, and now needs 24/7 specialized care from his family just to stay alive. I can't believe someone would do something like that to themselves over a girl they just met. Kid was just 18. Heading north on Route 83 in Pennsylvania late at night and early in the morning, southbound, I see a pickup with a trailer stopped and the trailer on fire. Driver inconsolable. Under the trailer is a motorcycle. 25 yards up the road is a human-sized bump. Rushed up there and the rider was just decimated. He was gurgling and twisted in so many horrifying positions. I know I shouldn't have moved him medically, but it was dark and late, and there was no way to alert oncoming traffic. So I pulled him to the shoulder and kind of sat on the ground with him. Several people stopped, one an RN, and she sort of propped his head up and tried to make space in his airway. He just gurgled and broken sounds and kept that up until the ambulance got there. When they loaded him onto the board and the headlights showed the injuries he sustained, it was legitimately unimaginable to see a human in that shape. The next day, the news posted he passed at the local hospital. I still think that the last faces he might have seen were a bunch of strangers on the side of the road. When 1,200 plus gallons of raw sewage backed up into my basement over 12 hours on a Sunday afternoon, while the city's sewer workers did little to nothing to help. It's a long story, but to summarize, I live on a literal border between two cities. Our neighborhood, it's weird in that it's just my street is part of the one city, but I pay my sewer taxes to the other city. In any case, the toilet is being weird one day, and we realize that sewage is coming up through a drain in the basement. We call a plumber, who quickly deduces this isn't our problem. It's Sunday afternoon on a gorgeous day, and of course, no city worker wants to come out. While we're trying to get the city to come fix things, the plumber asked if we wanted him to call a buddy who does hazmat cleanup, and thank God we did, because those guys saved our house. All afternoon, the hazmat cleaning guys are pumping out the sewage, which is up to our knees at this point, while the city sewer people try to find the clog but can't find it. So they end up leaving and abandoning us. I'm calling the city repeatedly, screaming about what's happening, and they just keep insisting it's not their problem, it's ours. After 8 hours of this, and at this point over 800 gallons drained out of our basement with more constantly flooding in, I ended up calling my real estate agent for advice, and he called a friend in the mayor's office. Then and only then did the city decide to mobilize. Ended up with both city sewer departments outside working on the issue, which they managed to resolve semi-quickly, and all I got was a half-assed apology from a sewer supervisor in a Hawaiian shirt who was pissed he had to leave a baseball game to come deal with this literal shit. Ended up being over $10,000 in damages, and it took us months to get a check to start making repairs. Easily one of the worst days of my life. Getting a massive head wound after being pistol whipped in an armed robbery while working the night audit shift by myself at a hotel. I was 20 years old, female. There are 5 of them. Always wondered if they enjoyed the $62 they got away with. The last thing I remember was saying the safe is on a 10-minute timer. I woke up bleeding from the head. The front desk was trashed. The sleeve of my jacket was torn off and there were coins everywhere. It was obvious what had happened. I wake up to this effing redneck standing over the desk who had been staying in our hotel for like 3 months. Dude had an unlit cigarette hanging out of his mouth and he goes, "You guys have any matches?" Being with my dad when he died of congestive heart failure, you basically drown slowly from the inside. Seeing him and my mom say goodbye after 51 great years of marriage at that moment that he passed over, he opened his eyes for the first time in a week and made solid eye contact and then gave in and died. Witnessing that and having that mental image caused me some stress for a number of years until the memory faded a bit. We had a family friend who was a hospice nurse who said it was one of the most difficult deaths she had seen. He didn't want to go. Ignored my sleep apnea for years. My wife would hear me snoring and breathing for minutes at a time and panic shake me all the time. I had no recollection, so I figured it wasn't a big deal. One night, I heard loudly what sounded like myself yelling to myself, "Wake the dumbass, you're not breathing." When I woke up, I realized that not only was I not breathing, but I couldn't. It took every bit of me to stand up and force my breathing to start again. I finally took it seriously and got the old CPAP. I know it's early in the video for me to come back, but, even though it's just a paragraph, sometimes these stories do affect me, too. I read a lot of them, but, stories like that just really hit me hard, so I hope everybody's having a good day. My brother once came into my room and threw me on the bed. He was standing behind me trying to pull my pants down. I resisted. He then drew a knife while screaming at me to be quiet. I resisted by flailing with my hands. The knife pierced my hand. He was shocked, drew back the knife, and backed away. I ran down the stairs, bleeding profusely. My mother was in a session downstairs with her therapist. The therapist got me a towel and drove me to the hospital, while my brother followed me and my mother in his car. In the ER, the mother blamed me for the incident. She said it was my fault, as I provoked my brother because I was wearing one of his t-shirts. All I remember from being in there, aside from that comment, was looking at my hand and thinking how interesting the inside of my hand looked where the skin had split. Abusive families really do have their way to mess with you, I suppose. I was 16, woke up at 4 a.m., my mother screaming my name. She, her boyfriend, and his brother had gotten drunk, and I had begged them all night to stop as I tried to sleep, and so did my little brother. I checked on my brother, told him to hide in the closet, and ran downstairs. There was broken glass everywhere, and my mother's drunk, bald, huge boyfriend was strangling my mother. I did not know what to do, so I started hitting the guy's back and screaming for him to stop. We got him off my mother, and then she chased him out, but insisted on continuing fighting with him instead of just closing the door and calling the police. She attacked me and beat me up when I tried to get her to stop and come back inside. I called the police, worrying my phone would die in the middle of the call. The police came and took all the adults away, and social workers asked me if there's anyone that can take me and my brother to. I'm not leaving. I just want them to get out of our house so I can clean up and put my brother back to bed. Of course, they don't listen to me as I'm just a child, or I should be just a child, but I had learned to take care of things. In the end, the police dragged me out of the house, and the social workers take us to my brother's. I am woken up by my mother's call, screaming at me how I'm a worthless liar who ruined everything. Finding someone I love dearly having OD'd on fentanyl, unresponsive, not breathing. Couldn't find a pulse, face pale, lips blue. I thought they were dead. I didn't panic. I went into crisis mode. I knew they were an addict. We live in an area where it's rampant. I Narcaned them, and they took a deep breath and came to disoriented almost immediately. Everyone should carry Narcan. It saves lives. They'd likely be dead if I didn't have it. How dead they looked will always haunt me. I don't think the nightmares or flashbacks will ever fully go away. Sometimes panic sets in at irrational times. Probably a car accident I was in with my girlfriend. She had just bought the car 2 weeks prior, and I was driving, and we were sitting at a red light. We heard tires screeching behind us, and someone plowed into the back of us going at least 50. They hit us hard enough that it sent our car barreling into the vehicle in front of us. When we finally got still, I looked up to see red splatter all over the dashboard and was afraid to look at my girl a few seconds and just heard her screaming. After about 3 seconds, I looked at her, and to my relief, she was just fine, just really scared by what happened. I had forgotten she bought a can of cheer wine with her when we went out. The effort that hit us took off before we could even get our bearings. Multiple people stopped and asked us if we were okay and gave us a description of the car and driver. I knew they meant well, but every person that stopped gave a different description, so it didn't do us or the police much good. Still haven't caught the person, as far as I know. I was like 8 years old at the dentist to get like 5 teeth pulled, and for whatever reason, the local anesthesia didn't really work, and I felt way too much of it. I hadn't ever experienced pain like that, and this older dentist just straight up didn't believe me and thought I was being a baby as I screamed and buckled and begged for more numbing. My parents said they could hear me screaming from the waiting room, and when I told them what happened, they were horrified. I'm pretty sure that's the last time I ever went to that dentist, now that I think about it. A few weeks ago, I had a skin graft and elected for laughing gas, as they convinced me it works great and has little recovery time, and I was in a state of panic or terror and straight up delusion, on and off the whole time. I didn't wild out, but I was out of my mind. I'd felt like I was in a waking nightmare, and when I explained my experience afterwards, they said, "Oh gosh, that's not how that's supposed to do. Please avoid laughing gas in the future, okay?" I've had a few. I'm a hospice nurse, and once went out to a house call in the middle of the night, and my dying but not dead patient had hundreds of maggots in their nose and mouth. I picked out over 100 and killed them while calmly speaking to their very sweet and loving partner, assuring her it wasn't her fault. It wasn't. And he wasn't suffering. He wasn't. I made the mistake of shining a flashlight in his mouth before I went, and I saw there were hundreds more. Inside I was screaming, "This is so effed up." And I felt like I tore my spirit in two, having to act calm in such a horror movie nightmare situation. The sight of that haunted me for a long time, and I'm sure I'll never forget it. He didn't die for another 36 hours after my visit, and I couldn't rest until he did. Okay, this happened in March-ish, and creeps me the F out still. Basically, after exams were over, my friends and I decided to meet up and watch this one movie we'd all been waiting for. Next to the mall is this multi-level parking. We had gone up to the roof before. It was an open space, and the first time we were there was during the early winters. It was high enough for a perfect view, and we had a great time taking pictures of the sunset, playing games, and whatnot. At that time, it was open to the public as well, because the lift would go up to the top floor, and around sunset, a few more people had come up to watch it. So this time, we had planned to go there after the movie. Even packed waffles and brownies to eat up there while enjoying the sunset like last time. It's very obvious that this place was kinda shady. Near the multi-level is the small garden kind of place, and it's usually homeless people or just people high on drugs who hang out there. The first time we were up on the roof, we had discovered used needles, broken bottles and shit, but being dumb, we didn't really care. This time when we tried to go up, the button to the 6th floor had been removed. The door in the 5th floor took the stairs up to the 6th. The door had this metal lock around its handles, but since someone had broken the glass part, we decided to go in anyway. It was clear the authorities didn't want people going up there, but again, we were really dumb and crawled through the small hole in the glass. As planned, we were having a great time. And at some point, my 3 friends decided to climb this ramp and sit there while I walked around close to the railing, looking down at the garden. Stupid again, I know. Anyway, 10 minutes or so later, these 2 men come up to the roof. I hadn't noticed them until one of my guy friends started to loudly call out to me, saying he had to show me something. As soon as I climbed up to the ramp, he asked me if I was okay, which obviously caught me off guard. All 3 of my friends looked kind of panicked. I brushed it off as them being paranoid. The same friend started to suggest we leave, and I was dumb enough to suggest we stay, and those men were probably there to drink, and we should leave them alone. While the 2 of us discussed whether to leave or not, our other friends informed us that the guys kept looking at us and taking and talking on their phones. This was kind of creepy, and after some convincing, we all decided it's better to be safe than sorry. Before we got the chance to climb down the ramp, though, 5 more men had come upstairs, and after meeting with the other 2, they started to head toward us. Now, there was only one way up or down the ramp, and I swear of them holding something that looked like a knife. They were headed towards us for sure. There was 4 of us against 7 grown-ass men. They climbed the ramp and effing surrounded us. Thankfully, a friend of mine who used a brain started to apologize profusely, asking them not to tell her father she was up here because he was a police officer who didn't want his daughter in trouble. Her father is not a police officer. We pretended to believe that they were some sort of authority there to remove us for trespassing, and started making up stories about how our folks were about to pick us up, and they'd be really mad, and we were good kids and stuff. That seemed to throw them off a bit, and they backed off a little. As soon as they did, we effing bolted. We ran down the stairs, didn't even look back, and swore never to go back. My friends later told me that initially When the two men saw me, they started to walk toward me, and when my friend called out to me, it startled them, as they probably didn't know I was up there alone.